Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. We're glad you were able to make the webinar. Today, we're going to talk about measuring and tracking our impact. I know we've had lots of conversations about public value statements and condition changes since we developed them 2 years ago now. Hard to believe it was that long ago. But, I think one of the things we'll always be thinking about is how do we actually measure that? And so we want to talk a little bit about ideas that others have come up with, some of your peers, and think through with you how you might do this in your own program. And first, we want to go through a little bit of how we're using the public value statements and the condition change data that we've been collecting. Since Project Board was launched, it's made it really nice to be able to collect that data. Katherine, if you can advance to the next slide.
Sure.
And we want to share some of that with you. Today for this webinar, we know it's really short. We do want to point out that this content in an expanded version is being shared at the information sessions. So if you've already been to one of the sessions, the one in Reading or Davis, you've heard some of this information already, and we'd still love to hear your thoughts and have you hear from your colleagues what they're thinking. But overall, as a result of this meeting, we really want you to recognize that collecting these impact data doesn't have to be an arduous process. We can find ways to streamline it by thinking in advance what we want to get out of it. And Katherine will be sharing some really good examples of that. So overall, we want to improve your understanding of the condition changes and those indicators that we use so that you can start tracking your condition changes and your data and how that relates to the indicators. We also want to share with you a database that's being developed that can help you use data to make safe inferences related to condition changes. And we want to share with you some data that's actually been developed by peers within ANR related to condition change indicators. So I've had the pleasure really of being able to start using all of the public value statements and the condition change indicators. And I have to say it's really become so helpful in how I go out and talk to prospective partners, donors, people who really don't know our work because they're not part of our day-to-day clientele, but to help them better understand who we are and the impact that we have on the state of California. And there's been some great examples. In the interest of time, we're not going to go through them today, but just talking with county boards of supervisors, county administrative officers, prospective donors. So thank you to everyone who's been working so hard to pull these data together and share your stories so that we can share them for you and really help build support for our work. And this is a picture of Glenda at the recent Regents meeting in July. And if you listen to that recording, you'll find that she really used a lot of that impact data that we collected through Project Board this spring in her presentation. And really one big change here is that the Regents really stepped up and heard that impact data. And I think really started to see us in a different light than they had previously when they heard about our activities. And I think that's a really good thing for ANR going forward. So Katherine, I'm going to turn it over to you to follow up.
All right, great. Thanks, Wendy. So Wendy's laid the groundwork of why we developed these and are using them. I'm going to go more into the what exactly are they and how we can use them. So what are condition changes? They're basically the longer term benefit of your work to the broader public, what we call public value. That's changes in condition at the economic, environmental, or social levels. That's compared to private value, which is the benefit to our individual participants in our programs when they learn or they experience behavior changes. So by no means are we starting to use condition changes or value them more than the private value. We serve our clientele first and foremost, but what we're really trying to do as an organization is link those significant changes that our participants experience and explain to the broader community and the state how that benefits others as well. So here are our condition changes. I have 2 slides of them. They've been posted for a couple years now. I just, in case folks hadn't heard, I wanted to briefly say these were developed with broad input from program team leaders, statewide program and institute directors, strategic initiative leaders. So a diverse group across all of our programs got together to first identify the public value statements. Those are in bold here. For our uses, we have our public value defined more broadly, and then under it, we have more specific condition changes. All of this contributes to the broader benefit to the state. And I'm going to go on to the rest of our condition changes here. What I have in red is we've gotten some feedback where people have been confused a little bit. So I want to just point out that the improved health for all is really talking about benefits at the individual level, whereas the community health is more aligned with the policy, systems, and environmental level changes that our nutrition education and our community and youth development programs are familiar with. So they're really affecting change at the individual and the community level, and that's what we're trying to differentiate here. There's 2 different stories, important stories that we have to tell at those 2 different levels. Briefly, I'll just mention these will possibly change over time. We've been using them for 2 years. We have other box. So people have provided some input if they're finding it difficult to connect to one of these. I am going to talk about how you can connect to these, and they're so broad that in most cases we expect that people can connect to them. But you can always provide input if you don't see how you fit to this other. So over time we'll revisit these and see if we do need to make changes, but for now we're going to continue using these so we have a couple more years of data and feedback on them. Okay, so how exactly are we using them? So we're collecting effort towards these condition changes. We've had 2 years of data in Project Board. That's for all of our cooperative extension academics, advisors, specialists, academic coordinators, academic administrators. All of the A&R academics that go through our merit promotion process talk about their effort towards these changes. In addition, for a couple years, we've collected data from the community education specialists through a Qualtrics survey. So we're trying to get broad programmatic input on how people are directing their energy and their effort towards affecting change in these areas. And then the other main piece that Wendy alluded to is we're having people tag their program outcomes that they put into Project Board to these condition changes. And a little later in my presentation, I'm going to show where we've posted actual evidence and outcomes from your colleagues and developed these condition change impact stories for you to see. So I'll show that later. So how can you use the condition changes? Again, like the organization, you could use them to help you better articulate the impact of your work. You can also use them to build support for your work locally, just like Wendy and Glenda are using it more broadly with the partners that they're meeting with. It's an opportunity for you to show and communicate how your work aligns and supports others in the organization. So these can be really useful in how you describe your work for your performance evaluation or merit promotion process. And another important piece is they can help you focus your work. We all know that many folks feel, overextended and there's a lot going on. And so by thinking through, and I'll give some examples later on, by thinking through where you have the greatest opportunity to affect change, you can focus on just a few of these condition changes versus trying to be everything for everyone. So they have been useful for some in sort of focusing on how you describe your thematic work that you're doing and possibly give you some help in trying to say no to certain endeavors because you're focusing in a couple condition change areas. So how do you connect your work to condition changes? I'm going to go through a number of questions that we've gotten over the last couple years. So folks want to know, how do I connect to these long-term condition changes when I just started? Either I just started as in a new position or I just started a new project program. Well, we suggest that you explain it as potential or anticipated impact, and it helps people understand the overall purpose of the work that you're doing. It sort of answers the so what question, and I have some specific examples later on. So this does not, though, mean that you need to conduct massive longitudinal studies. Some of our colleagues do, and it makes sense for the research that they're doing, and that's amazing and a resource for all of us to use, but that's not the expectation for everyone by any means. We also want to make sure these changes don't happen as the result of a single event or as a result of a single product that you create. So it's the culmination of a lot of different activities that you have over time that can lead to these condition changes. So think about how you can communicate this longer term benefit about why you're doing all of these things when you get started. So another question is, or concern is, I'm not responsible for all this change. That's definitely true. Clearly, there's a lot of influences that affect people's behavior, their ability to change, and ultimately affect how we can have broader impact at the social, environmental, or economic level. So by no means are we trying to overstate our role, but we can talk about what we want to do is talk about how our work does contribute to these. And so you can often think about this as, and we can use different data that I'm going to show you to make what is called the safe inference, to connect the measured program outcomes that you have. How can you safely infer or connect those to this bigger picture change? So the question about how do I measure condition change without spending all my time measuring it? So if you've come to my practical methods to measuring outcomes workshop, we're always trying to help people think about being strategic about what you measure. There's many, many things in any program that you can measure. Just like in a survey, you can ask many questions, but you want to be strategic about what you're measuring. So you don't need to measure everything at every single event that you do. Also, you can really leverage data that your partners and your clientele are collecting, and we'll show some examples. And then again, it's about finding that existing research or agency data that creates the safe inference to how we're having broader change. So how do I determine which of the 24 condition changes your work links to? A logic model can help as a tool that many of you are familiar with. Many funders require them or use them. It's not the only tool, but it's a simple tool that we like to use, and I'll show you a couple slides. Also, when you're trying to figure out what you're doing, you can look at what your colleagues are doing and what the statewide programs are doing. Again, on the Condition Change webpage, there are stories there, and there's FTE data there about how your colleagues in your statewide program, how they're committing their effort towards different things. So you can refer to those for help in determining which ones. So I'm going to share an example here from the UC Master Gardener program. So let's imagine the work that they're doing where they've trained volunteers in a number of different content areas, and volunteers are now leading composting workshops and demonstrations. So what long-term benefit does that have to our community? Well, let's use the logic model to walk this through. We want to answer the question of what difference are you trying to make through these composting workshops? So we want to think about the outcomes that are the result of these activities. So we're expecting that when the public participants come, they're going to gain knowledge and skills about how to compost. Okay, then what? Well, we're hoping then that they'll actually adopt those green waste reduction practices. And measuring those two things in and of themselves takes time and thought and needing to be strategic. But we still want to ask the question of what broader benefit does that have? Well, we can leverage some existing research. There's this biocycle study that measured. Our UC Master Gardener program is not measuring this, but this study did. They looked at 16 households over 10 months, and they were able to measure that almost 6 tons of green waste was diverted from the landfill because people were adopting green waste management practices and composting. So how does that connect to our condition changes? Well, we know research also shows that there's a lot of air quality concerns with all the trucks going back and forth to landfills. So we can say that by diverting green waste from the landfills, it can improve air quality and it can increase ecological sustainability of the landscapes. And that then falls under our broader public value statement of protecting California's natural resources. Let's take another look at a different logic model. This one actually has indicators in blue at the bottom. So again, logic models help you think through what is that ultimate benefit you're trying to achieve, and you can work it back and forth. You can start with, okay, what ultimate change am I trying to create? And then what do I need to do? What do my participants need to change in terms of their practices? In order for them to do that, what do I need to teach? So you can work it backwards, you can work it frontwards. We often find when we work with people to develop these, you work it back and forwards. Once you have your logic model, you want to think about what exactly are you going to measure, what evidence, and that's what these indicators are. Typically, they're shown as, numbers of things or percents. And again, there's a lot of things that you can measure. We need to be strategic. So when we're talking about condition change indicators, we're talking about this final box here. We've done all of this work with the ultimate goal, in this case, of farm profitability increasing. So what would be the indicator here? Well, we could look at the number of people that have reported increased profits so that we then know that they're saying their profitability has increased. We can get the data from them about how much it's increased. So that's what we mean by indicators. It's the actual evidence. Okay, so where do you get this condition change indicator data? There's a number of different ways that I've alluded to, but let me walk you through it here before we look at examples. So again, sometimes you can collect this data from your clientele partners. So they're measuring it and they can give it to you. Like I said in the last example, they can tell you that their farm is now more profitable because they've adopted some new technique. Or perhaps there's existing research about showing if they adopt a certain practice, the research shows that they can save X number of dollars per acre because there's reduced inputs or increased yield. So then you can make this safe inference talking about how your measured program outcomes are contributing to this bigger picture condition change. And lastly, there's a number of different agencies that we work with, the California Department of Food and Agriculture, Department of Pesticide Regulation, water agencies, et cetera, that collect condition change indicator data that you can connect your work to make the broader point about how you're contributing to positive change on the broader scale. So let's look at a few examples here. So this one is from Katherine Jarvis Sheen, and she was able to use her clientele's condition change data. So she had an activity where there was a rootstock trial, and it went on for a number of years, and she knew from talking to people that they were adopting this rootstock that was more tolerant of boron, which is what they needed in that area. So how did she really know that people adopted it? She was able to get from her nursery partners sales data that indicated that that rootstock had doubled. So we knew that people were using it and the nurseries were more profitable as a result of selling this rootstock. So ultimately, we can talk about how that increases agricultural efficiency and profitability. I put in there potentially the opportunity to link with CDFA data, production data, that shows that in this last year, the production of almonds hit a record high. So all of our work around rootstocks is contributing to keeping production up high because we've got these boron-tolerant varieties that are still able to have high yield. Let's look at another example. This is from Stephen Swain, an environmental horticulture advisor. Over a 10-year period, so again, it took time. This wasn't the result of one event. He worked with Master Gardener volunteers on these garden walks where they were teaching people and the public about water conservation techniques. And he, again, this is an example where he was actually able to measure condition change data, in this case, water saved, gallons of water saved. And they were working with the Marin Municipal Water District, that's this acronym here at the bottom, and his partner here measured that there was a reduction in water usage as a result of the program that they collaborated on over this long period of time. So again, we're able to tell a story about how our work is contributing to improved water use efficiency. This is an example from Sheila Berry, who's a livestock and natural resources advisor. She was working to develop grazing management practices to the end of improving conservation. And she was able to measure that the agencies she worked with were adopting and implementing plans based on the rangeland science that she was informing them with. And she measured, again here, she was able to measure that as a result, on 5 of their properties, which was over 11,000 acres, they were now managing vegetation and their rangeland resources for better conservation as a result. So that then connects to our condition change of improved management and use of land. This is an example. I have the next couple examples are about how you explain potential condition changes. Those 3 before took a significant amount of time and they actually realized and measured condition level change. But we're not all there yet. Some of you are new, some of your programs are new. So how do you, again, do it if you've only just started? So in this case, Surendra Dara had been working for a while on biologicals and had a big conference in addition to many other meetings to really inform his clientele about the benefits of using biologicals. So he measured at the end of his conference that 96% of the people that responded were really planning to apply and use the information. And he was able to quantify that on 70,000 acres. So the so what of that is that potentially 70,000 acres could be made more sustainable by the use of biologicals because he's leveraging existing research to show that those are more sustainable given they allow for a more efficient use of chemicals, they can reduce groundwater contamination, etc. Thus, the whole so what of why he's doing this is really working to contribute to increasing the ecological sustainability of agriculture in this case. Here's another potential condition change, quantifying and connecting to condition change to make a really compelling point about why you're doing your work and the benefit that it can lead to. So this is from Lynn Wanderlich, farm advisor. She had done research trials that showed that saving a spray using, oh no, I forget, PMI, Pesticide Management Index, I believe.
It might be powdery mildew index.
Thank you for that. Yes, they could save a spray by using this new index, this new tool that had been developed. And she knew from talking to people that some folks were using it. She hadn't yet systematically documented how many people were using it, but she needed to make a point about, that this can lead to change. So she used, again, existing research, this cost study, to make a safe inference and to extrapolate to the benefit that that could lead to. So you can see what it is there. And again, overall, that can increase agricultural efficiency and profitability. I just have a couple more examples and then we want to get to wrap up and have some time for questions. This is an example, again, of being able to make a safe inference and potentially extrapolate, which is what these 2 academics chose to do here. So this is a water project and they were working to help folks use CIMMYS weather station data, which can help them improve water use efficiency. So they were able to measure that, which we would consider sort of a decision-making policy change here, that their best practices to conserve water were included in these regional water quality control board standards. So that's significant in and of itself, but what potential impact does that have as a result? So Richard and Khaled explained using, this is a Doug Parker, et cetera here, CalAg article which estimated the approximate dollar benefit here. And so they were able to extrapolate and estimate for the region where they were working that potentially as a result of these standards being adopted, there was the potential for 6.5 million in water and energy savings. You can see how that then is a way to connect and make a compelling argument about how we're contributing to both water use efficiency as well as agricultural efficiency and profitability, given the savings there. Last example from the nutrition side of the house. So there were a number of workshops. Our nutrition programs do a lot of classes, and they were able, in this case, to measure the number of participants who improved some of their eating habits. So that, again, is the individual level benefit, which is huge in and of itself, but how can we tell the story of the ultimate broader benefit? Well, we know that when people have these different kinds of, or adopt different eating habits, that actually leads to overall improvements in their health based on, there's a number of studies. In this case, we cited this sort of summary study from the Journal of American Dietetic Association, where it links, you know, eating habit changes are linked to improvements in cardiovascular health, et cetera. So that's how we can tell the story of eating, you know, more fruits and vegetables can lead to improved individual health for all. I wanted to share with you some of the resources that we've developed in case you haven't seen them. So I'm going to pull over this web page here quickly. If you go to our homepage and search condition changes, you can see this web page. Each of these condition changes has a story with actual measured program outcomes from your colleagues with their name, so you can see what folks are measuring and how that then links and contributes to our overall statewide condition change story. In the interest of time, I'm not going to show you that, but you can see it. I also want to show you here how to measure condition changes is the examples that I showed you, plus a whole impact story where we wrote up, when you write a narrative, what would that look like? So we're happy to answer questions about those if you look at them and still have questions. I'm going to go ahead and move on to share that we've started a new Google Doc. We'll be sending out a call with this link, but we want to really build this repository of examples of not only condition change indicator that your colleagues are collecting, but also existing research that others can use to make those connections, to make that safe inference. So look out for the call coming. We've been collecting additional ideas during the information sessions that we'll be adding to this, and once that's done, I'll send out a call for folks to look at and add to. Wendy, I'm going to turn it back over to you to wrap it up with some takeaways before we turn it over for questions. Great.
I am going to address one of the questions in the chat pod, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Dan Makin's referring back to the example from Khaled for the fitness data. And the question is, does that assume they reach 10% of irrigated acreage statewide? And I don't think so. If I remember the full story on that one, Dan, I believe it was a 10% adoption for their area of their clientele. And so they only extrapolated it that far, their area of the state. But certainly I think if we have a statewide project, last week we had a great example in Davis of a statewide project on the environmental horticulture side where different regions of the state are adopting strategies and measuring impact. And if we were to know then what the adoption rate was across the state, we could certainly scale the impact to that statewide level. So hopefully that answers your question, but I think it does illustrate that the stories behind the short slide that Katherine was able to prepare today are actually much longer and give that level of detail. And we certainly use that as we're talking about our work with others. So thanks for the question. Anyone else, if you have some, just type them in. Hopefully what you've taken away from this short webinar, the little bit of time we've had, is that condition changes really occur as a result of multiple efforts. It's the research you're doing or the research you're familiar with through the literature, your writings, your talks, your demonstrations, policy that you've been influential in enacting. All of that comes together to lend itself to these condition changes. It's rarely a single activity that results in a condition change. And so this is where it gets back to the logic model approach, where it's the sum of all the activities that lead to the intended outcome. Documenting that change in condition doesn't have to be time consuming, particularly if it's intentional. If you sat down and thought, what is it I want to get out of this? And how am I going to get there? And how am I going to measure that it worked? You know, the so what of it and the impact that I've had. And the result of focusing on a determined set of condition changes really is a powerful story for the impact of all the work that UCANR has. So keep thinking about how to collect that data, keep sharing your stories. We are using them. And really, it's such an impressive message that we could be sharing across the state. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Katherine, and I'll monitor the chat pod. I don't see anything else come in yet.
Yeah, I want to be mindful that we're at 12:30, so we understand folks might need to get off, but we're willing to and happy to stay on the line to answer questions. Ideas that you might have about how you can use condition changes in your work, or any examples that you have of where you've found condition change indicator data from partners or agencies. Yeah, so we'll stay on a couple lines, see what comes in the chat box. We'll go back to questions in case you're staying on.
There is a survey, if you could take a minute and fill out that survey. In particular, we're very interested in hearing what other topics would you like to hear about during this webinar cafe, so that we can line up some of those speakers and get your feedback on that. And Katherine, in rereading Dan's question, he's suggesting that that was 10% of total California water saved. Maybe I misremember that story. Do you have any recollection? Or perhaps it was just extrapolated to California as a potential if everyone adopted these practices.
My recollection was they were extrapolating to their region based on the California Ag article, but I will say that's a UC Delivers. It's actually an older example, not one of the new ones, so I would suggest we can all go back to look at that to clarify.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Just a reminder, there is a town hall at 1:30. If you need help finding that Zoom information, feel free to drop me an email. And otherwise, people might want to take a break, catch up on email, take a little walk around the neighborhood between now and then.
I see just a couple thank yous. Thanks right back at you. Wendy, I suggest we stay on maybe a couple more minutes, and then I think folks probably are running out to get some lunch or do a quick walk.
Great. Thanks, everybody.